The only thing flowing harder than the rainwater at Barber Motorsports Park was salt. Charlie Kimball was pissed off at Ed Jones. Paul Tracy was pissed at IndyCar race control. Simon Pagenaud was pissed at Gabby Chavez. And Kenny Wallace tried and failed to come at me on Twitter. So as you can see, this is going to be a spicy episode. So, a very controversial weekend and then some at the Barber Motorsports Park. Started out in qualifying, and the story in qualifying was the fact that because there was inclement weather, easy for me to say, heading into the weekend for Sunday, Saturday became a use all the tires you can in qualifying session, and we actually saw quite an interesting mix of times being set on both the black and the red tires. Many teams were adamant that the red tires were better, but we really didn't see much of a difference between the two compounds. Ultimately, it was the sticker red tires that took the pole position ultimately, but several drivers got all the way up into the Fast Six using pretty much only black tires. So that was fairly interesting to see tire wear not really be an issue, or at least tire consumption not really be an issue in a qualifying session. But as I mentioned, inclement weather. IndyCar actually moved the start time of the race up significantly, meaning no pre-race show at all. Not many tears were shed. Race was underway after starting the race. For some reason, I'm still not exactly sure what the logic was behind this. Starting the race a lap later, so they actually started the race under yellow, ran one lap under caution speeds, and then threw the green flag. Seemed a bit arbitrary to me. I'm not really exactly sure why the procedure was the way it was, and we'll get into more procedural things later, believe me. But Josef Newgarden absolutely blitzed the field. He pulled away and ran away and hid from the pole position, and it wasn't even close. Then Marco Andretti made me look like I had really bad takes because I told a lot of people on Twitter that Marco is supposedly one of the better rain drivers in IndyCar racing. The last time we really saw a race play out in a monsoon was Detroit 2015. He finished second in that race. We've seen other examples of Marco being quite fast in the rainy conditions, but this time, as he chased his teammate Alexander Rossi, racing for, I believe, 7th position, he pushed a little too hard, spun the car out, very nearly collected James Hinchcliffe, and yeah, Marco gonna Marco, unfortunately, on that one. But it didn't take very long for the nonsense to begin happening. Charlie Kimball and Ed Jones get into it. Kimball goes into the Armco barrier, and he didn't have very nice things to say about Mr. Jones.
That's just a dumb move. He's not a rookie anymore. He needs to not be making rookie mistakes like that.
Now, I have to say, there's a lot of Kimball haters out there, but I have to say he was wronged on this one. He was actually driving a pretty fantastic race. I think he was up into the top 12, and Jones simply ran him over, and guess what? No penalty. So, once again, we're seeing fairly inconsistent punting calls from race control. I've been calling it this whole time during the road races of the season, and again, I think we're now in favor of non-calls versus called penalties again. It was 50-50 after Long Beach, but we've got another punt. And this punt, even though I guess maybe it was because there wasn't absolute 100% conclusive proof that Ed Jones nudged Charlie Kimball, but it was fairly, you know, if you look at it, you know, a few times in slow motion, you could pretty clearly see a nudge. And, you know, no matter what you say about Charlie Kimball, the fact that he lost it in that particular way, in that particular section of the course, seemed suspicious to say the least. But unfortunately, during that caution flag, it allowed the water to start pooling up on the racetrack, and it just extended the caution period longer and longer and longer. And believe me, I posted a lot of cats falling asleep in GIF form on Twitter because it felt like IndyCar was extending this caution flag for a very long time. And it turns out it was during this caution flag, not only was the weather accumulating on the track, but it was also picking up. So that was part of the reason they were staying under the yellow. Drivers were complaining about vision problems, but IndyCar, in their infinite wisdom, decided to go back to the green, and the predictable result happened. Josef Newgarden nearly spun right in front of the field, and goodness gracious, would that have been a 22-car pileup if that had happened. But he saved it, but Will Power was not as lucky, spinning a full 360, nearly collecting Ryan Hunter-Reay, smacking the inside wall, and heading down into turn 1. Now on Twitter, I made a bit of a jerk out of myself because I was screaming about why did they throw a full course yellow for that. They could have dragged the car back into the pits. The field's all the way on the other side of the track. They got plenty of time to get that car in. Well, it turns out it wasn't really just because of the crash that they threw that full course yellow. It was because the track conditions were deemed to be too severe to race in. Now, this is where we're going to start getting into some controversy, because a lot of people were hitting me up on Twitter and saying that part of the reason to blame for all of this is the fact that Firestone still brings what is essentially, by modern standards, an intermediate tire to the racetrack. Now, I had been under the impression that there was a new rain tire debuted in 2016. We hadn't really seen it, though, because the last rain race prior to that had been Toronto 2015 until Watkins Glen of last year. And even in that case, only the morning warm-up was ran in damp conditions. The lights race, ironically enough, was ran in a heavy downpour, and the Cooper tires held up just fine under those conditions. But the Firestones only had about one solid lap of rain tire running on them at the Glen, because by the time they had started the race, despite the fact that it was declared a wet start, there was a pretty significant dry line, and only a couple of drivers, I believe the ECR Ed Carpenter cars with J.R. Hildebrand and Spencer Piggott, as well as I believe Max Chilton at Watkins Glen, stayed out on those tires more than one lap. Everybody else came into the pits and came out on the slick compound tires, whatever their choice was at that particular moment. So this was really the first time we had seen what I thought was this compound of tires, but I've been told on Twitter that apparently they still haven't brought a full rain tire to IndyCar. It's very confusing because Robin Miller also said on the broadcast that Firestone's looking to bring a new tire to Detroit. So that also gives me a little bit of nervousness heading into the Grand Prix of Indianapolis in a couple weeks. If that race is rainy, are we going to see an absolute shambles? Possibly, but hey, guess what? The IndyCar Grand Prix is 2 days before the next Indy 500 testing session this year, because God forbid we have actual practice days during the month of May, because it's not like there's bump day this year. But anyway, so I guess they've got 2 days to get it in if they have to rain it out during the Grand Prix. But this comes to a point where red flags got particularly annoying, and I'm fully aware that this is not an NBC issue, not necessarily anyway. It's an IndyCar issue, because it seems like there's a bit of a problem in IndyCar right now, especially with the rain racing. So let's talk about that. So I'm not going to start this section with my thoughts. I'm going to pass it over to NBC Sports' Paul Tracy, because he made a statement during the broadcast that really, I think, really nailed down my personal feelings on the entire matter of IndyCar and their rain racing.
I mean, this is one of the things that just frustrates me a lot, is whenever it rains, it seems, in an IndyCar race, it just always turns into a full panic knee-jerk reaction all the time, and it's frustrating to watch. I think that the fans want to see a race. They want to see these guys drive and really work hard to stay on the track, and you know, the conditions are tricky, but it's the same for everybody. And
so thanks to my friend Steve K51 on YouTube here and across the rest of social media and in real life. But I figured I'd give his YouTube channel a shout out because he's got some great racing content on there. You should check him out. Hopefully he'll post a comment so you can go check him out. But he graciously provided me that clip because I thought it was really important that people hear Paul Tracy say that, because it's very important to understand that IndyCar really makes a lot of these problems happen for themselves in the rain situations. It's almost always a bleep show. It's almost always a shambles when they do this or when they try to race in the rain, because they try to please almost everybody. They're worried about the fans at the track. They're worried about the TV. They're worried about the fans watching on TV. They're worried about the teams. They've got all these things they're worried about, and they're not trying to put on a race, and they're not trying to put on the best race they can. They're trying to put the cars on the track essentially to fill out their obligations to the TV and to the tracks. And in my opinion, first of all, let me just say this. The 2-hour time limit needs to go away. I mean, unless the race is on ABC, of which there are 3 of those left, and only 2 of them are road courses. Of course, the Indianapolis 500, that will never have a 2-hour time limit. It's a 100-lap hard sell on the end of the race, should there be inclement weather. But the road course races are all almost often capped at a 2-hour time limit. But the thing about the 2-hour time limit is they didn't even follow their own rules. I mean, they stopped the clock when the cars come into the pits, which obviously, fair play to them, they're trying to keep the show going. But if TV time is not an issue, if you can go 4 hours in a broadcast window, why not guarantee the fans the full 90-lap show instead of cutting it down and then running half of it on Monday like we saw, or an hour and 15 like we saw on Monday? It wasn't even half the race. I mean, this is something that I think really upset me about the way yesterday's red flag and then subsequent restart today was handled. Obviously, IndyCar seems to, at least in terms of the rain racing and how they want to present it, it seems to have entertainment in mind as well as the safety of the drivers. But the problem is, it seems as though the cars aren't suited to monsoon conditions, the tires aren't suited to monsoon conditions, and for whatever reason, the drivers' helmets and visors, for whatever reason these days, are unable to cope with copious amounts of weather. So what do you do? In my opinion, and this is just a hard stance I think IndyCar needs to take, you know, if you can't put on a proper rain show, you should just call it. Call it straight up. As soon as it looks like the track is lost, if it looks like it's going to be puddly the entirety of the race, if you're going to just have crashes, if you're going to have rivers running across the track, if you're going to have extended red flags and yellows, just postpone it. Put it off till the next day. Start at 9 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock in the morning, you know, whatever. But get the race, you know, do the race when you can actually do the race properly, instead of a bunch of stopping and starting. And speaking of restarting the race properly, and this is where I'm going to get really upset at IndyCar, is the fact that IndyCar has a parc fermé rule, but they don't have a parc fermé rule. And let me explain what parc fermé is. Parc fermé is what happens at the end of a session. It's essentially an impound rule. If you're familiar with American motorsports, European motorsports, that will translate one way or the other. Parc fermé or impound loss. What happens if you rain delay a race, the series confiscates all the cars, meaning the fuel and the tires and the setups are all fixed as the way the race started. Kind of like the positions were kept the same from day 1, Sunday, to day 2, Monday. But what IndyCar allowed was non-parc fermé rules, where they were able to change the tire compounds they wanted to change. They were able to fuel the cars as much or as little as they wanted to. And they were able to change the setups from a wet to dry setup. They were allowed to completely change the cars that started the race, despite the fact that the race they were running on Monday was a continuation of the race on Sunday, which isn't a problem if the rules are exactly the same for everybody else, but they were not. They first did not allow Charlie Kimball and Carlin Racing to repair their car at all. But for Will Power and Penske, who crashed on the last attempt at a restart on Sunday, they allowed them to fix their car, but they forced Penske to be under parc fermé rules, meaning that not even the Penske engineers could touch the rain tires that were still affixed to the car after it had crashed. They had to look at that car and not touch it until the race was resumed. So wait a second. Townsend Bell was said on NBC that IndyCar does not have parc fermé rules, and yet One car was in park for May, and the rest were not. And you want to talk about unfair, if you want to talk about it as a fair point, it was not a fair point. The drivers who had taken risks earlier in the race, including Marco Andretti and Simon Pagenaud, who had gone into the pits for fresh rain tires and fuel, were up in terms of the strategy. That was all taken away because of the rain race not podcast, but rain race rules that IndyCar has in place. It's ridiculous. It's amazing to me that all of this, I mean, you want to talk about race manipulation? That is straight up race manipulation. And I'm going to be honest here, if you want to manipulate the race that much, IndyCar, just restart it. Let everybody fix their cars, put on whatever setups you want, fuel cars up, tire them up. Let's line them up the way they qualified on Saturday. And let's go racing. Let's go for 90 laps. And if your goal here is to not cheat the fans out of the racing, not try to put the drivers in danger, and provide a fair show, just cancel. If it's raining, cancel. A little bit of sprinkle like we saw at the end of this race, I guess that's fine, especially if the race is already in progress. But if it's raining before the race, just cancel. Or don't even try to start it until you can get the track dry. And that's just my opinion on that. So there was a race that took place on Monday, hour and 15 minutes, though it took, the actual green flag was about an hour and 8 minutes to go in the race because there were some issues with Max Chilton getting back up to speed. He actually never really got back into the show, but we saw Josef Newgarden pick up where he left off yesterday and absolutely blitzed the field. He was gone. He actually pulled out a 23-second lead at one point, 28 seconds even, at some points during the race. Just absolute domination from Josef Newgarden. And I kind of find this funny. Again, I just want to point out little logical fallacies in some of the arguments that I used to hear folks make about IndyCar racing. Everybody wants to talk about how bad the aero kit competition was, but then again, we've looked in the first 4 races of this season, and we've seen drivers absolutely be able to pull away to huge leads in each of the first 4 races of the season. Wickens at St. Pete, Newgarden at Phoenix, Rossi at Long Beach, and then Newgarden again here at Barber. Kind of interesting that even though everything's spec and supposedly closer, it's not really. But anyway, there wasn't short on action, though, because Zachary Clayman DeMello was driving like an absolute animal. Somebody tweeted at me on Twitter. He was driving like a pissed-off teenager. Well, that was because he was a pissed-off teenager. The Dale Coyne Racing team made an unapproved adjustment under the red flag. Too bad they didn't wait until the race was called because they could have made all the adjustments they wanted to. But he was given a 2-lap penalty despite being on the lead lap, so he just decided to drive absolutely crazy. And then we had this coming together between him and Spencer Pigot, and he got his 4-wheel drifting license in an IndyCar. Absolutely crazy. One of the craziest crashes that weren't a crash I've ever seen in IndyCar racing. So that was fantastic. It was just really crazy racing. Well, I guess it was wrecking, right? We were kind of a hybrid between wrecking and racing there for sure. Spencer Pigot definitely made a bit of a tactical error in terms of that. But then the clouds started rolling in and it got rainy. And this is where we saw some serious strategy. There were teams originally deciding to go on 1 or 2 stop strategies, trying to get tire or fuel advantage. But interestingly enough, Josef Newgarden pitted very, very early in that stint for rain tires. And on Twitter, I made another fantastic hot take where I was like, Newgarden's screwed. He's done. He went in too early because Sebastian Bourdais, who had actually drove a pretty fantastic race, was out on dry red tires and was actually pulling away for quite a few laps from Newgarden. Actually had the gap up to something like 23 seconds. Honestly, he really should have come into the pits about 2 laps before he ended up doing it, but eventually Bourdais came into the pits for dry tires, and unfortunately, he dropped back through the field and just never really recovered. And so it was Josef Newgarden winning fairly dominantly here at Barber Motorsports Park. So really not a lot to say about this race. It was very controversial for a lot of reasons, a lot of the wrong reasons, unfortunately. It's never fun when you have to talk about race control rather than the actual race that's going on the racetrack. But you know, there was some great racing behind him. Of course, we had that battle to the checkers between Sebastian Bourdais and Scott Dixon, side by side racing at Barber. Doesn't get much better than that. It's kind of funny how everybody used to talk, especially when Barber was brought onto the schedule around 2009, 2010. Everybody kind of said, oh man, this track, it's going to be useless. It's a bike track. I think Robin Miller also had mentioned that. I think he was the person who coined that when everybody was talking about bringing Barber into the schedule around 2008, 2007. Everybody talked about how it was a bike track, but hey, the crowds are pretty good. We should probably go there. IndyCar goes there, and then suddenly, especially in the last couple of years, this year really not so much, but the last couple of years, the racing has been absolutely balls to the wall and fantastic. So hopefully next year it'll be better. They actually broke an attendance record on Saturday. 34,000 people showed up for qualifying. So, you know, good to see the Barber race fans supporting the race. It's a shame that they kind of got hosed this year, literally. Yeah, we're moving on to Indianapolis. IndyCar Grand Prix first, then the 92nd running. The 102nd running of the Indianapolis 500. And as you guys are fully aware, this month, or month of May, is going to be Indy 500 month. A full month of Indy 500 coverage means video games. Going to be recording a lot over the next couple of weeks to actually fill out the entire month of content. Going to be doing some documentary-style videos as well. I'm not going to reveal those quite yet, but I think you're going to enjoy them. I am actually even planning a top 10 list. Hopefully that gets out as well, because I think that's going to be a really fantastic video. Diecast reviews, got a few in store, including some micro machines that you may have never known existed. And then, of course, the regular Indy 500 month content. The pure sound videos, obviously, the starting grid videos for both the IndyCar Grand Prix and the Indianapolis 500. Speaking of the Indianapolis 500, going to be doing a bandwagoner's guide for that, so be sure to take a look at that. And this year, I'm hoping, I think I'll be able to pull this off, but I think I will be able to do live streams, live broadcasts, live IndyCar Red Pills from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway directly after practice. So I'm going to do each day from the Grand Prix, each day there's cars on track. I'm going to try to do this, a live broadcast, hopefully immediately after practice, where you can ask me questions. I can kind of give you a review of the day. I think that may be some interesting content. I know some people have been asking for a little bit more commentary out of me going into the Indianapolis 500, and that's what I'm going to try to provide. And I think live broadcasts could be quite fun. Indy 500 practice ends at 6 p.m. Eastern time every day. I think the Grand Prix may be a little bit different for those days, so stay tuned. I'll try to schedule all those on YouTube so you can see when they're showing up. But that should be interesting. And obviously, you know, man, this is the best time of a year to be an IndyCar fan, because you got you know, two big races in Indianapolis. Obviously, the 500 is huge. Bumping this year, that's confirmed, 35 entries. Looks like that's going to be a hard number. It looks like Harding's not actually going to happen. Looks like a lot of those Davison rumors, even perpetuated by me. I mean, the Harding-Davison rumors, and Harding with other people like Juan Pietrahita and even Santi Urrutia are looking like they're maybe not going to happen. Buddy Lazier, that's, I can tell you, is on pretty shaky ground at this point. Don't think it's going to happen either. So it looks like we're probably set for 35, so that means 2 people going home, but that means the month of May is going to be very nail-biting for everybody, because, again, no provisionals, no guaranteed starting spots at Indianapolis. It's the fastest 33 that qualify, and that's what we love about it. So, I guess I'll give you some hot takes before we go. Indianapolis, who's going to be strong there? Well, obviously, I think for the Grand Prix, it's pretty simple, straightforward. There's only been 2 drivers that have ever won that race, Simon Pagenaud and Will Power, and I don't think Simon Pagenaud has a very good handle on the Universal Aero Kit. Therefore, Will Power will go back-to-back and win 3 out of the first 5 Grand Prix of Indianapolises. Indianapolis 500, who do I think is going to be pretty strong there? This is always a question, because there always seems like there's 10 or 15 guys that could win the race every single year. think you got to look at the Scott Dixons of the world. You got to look at guys like Alexander Rossi, of course. But I think it's going to go to Helio Castroneves this year. I think he's going to make it 4. He's on the Al Unser Senior path, literally the exact same year-by-year path, down to even the order that he won his Indianapolis 500s in. But if it's not Helio Castroneves, I think it could be a guy like Carlos Munoz, Sebastian Bourdais, guys who are in very fast cars who haven't quite had that opportunity yet to go to the front. And of course, you can look at dark horses like James Davison. You can look at Takuma Sato to repeat from Rahal Letterman Lanigan. Last time he drove for that team, he was second and very nearly was 3 corners away from winning it. J.R. Hildebrand, what's he going to do in that Dreyer Reinbold car? Could Danica Patrick surprise? Is she going to be motivated? I think that's going to be the question for her. But yeah, it's going to be one hell of a month, and I hope you guys are here sticking with me throughout it all. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube, and we'll see you for Indy 500 month. It's going to be a heck of a month.